Hello, and welcome to Super English Talks. I am very happy that you're here with me today. If this is your first time listening, thank you for joining. If you have listened before, welcome back. This podcast is a place where we learn English and talk about useful and interesting ideas. So if you want to improve your English listening and speaking and learn something helpful for your life at the same time, you are in the right place. My name is Jara, and I will be your host today. I speak slowly, clearly, and simply so you can understand me easily. This podcast is made for English learners, especially at the B1 level. This means you already know some English, and now you want to get better, step by step. Have you ever opened your mouth to speak, and no words came out? That's how my story begins. Not with success, but with silence. It was a small classroom on a rainy morning. The teacher smiled at me and said, "Can you tell us your name and something about yourself?" Simple question, right? Just a few words in English. But my heart started beating fast. My mind went blank. I could hear my classmates breathing. I could hear the fan spinning. I could hear everything except my own voice. Inside, I was screaming the words. My name is Jara, but outside, nothing. Just fear. Just silence. That was the first time I realized how powerful a voice could be and how painful it feels when you can't use it. I wanted to speak English so badly. Not to show off. Not to sound smart. I just wanted to connect. I wanted to understand songs, movies, stories. I wanted to make friends who spoke that language so easily. But at that moment, I couldn't even say my own name with confidence. When the class ended, I sat in the corner of the room, staring at my notebook. I had written beautiful sentences the night before. I am from a small town. I like reading books. I want to learn English. All correct. All perfect. But when the time came to speak, those words betrayed me. I thought, maybe I'm just not good at languages. Maybe my tongue is too heavy. Maybe my brain is too slow. Maybe English is just not for me. But something inside me whispered, no, you can't give up here. That night, I went home and stood in front of the mirror. I looked at my reflection and said, my name is Jara. At first, my voice shook. Then I tried again. My name is Jara, a little clearer this time. And again. My name is Jara. The sound was small, but it was mine. I remember smiling. It was the first time I felt a small spark, a tiny victory. Because maybe learning English wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about being brave, even for a few seconds. Days turned into weeks. Every morning before school, I whispered short English phrases to myself. Simple ones. How are you? I am fine. What do you like? I didn't understand everything, but I liked how they sounded. English started to feel like music. Each sentence had rhythm. Each word had a beat. And when I repeated them slowly, I could almost feel my tongue learning to dance. Still, speaking in front of people was terrifying. It felt like walking on a stage where everyone could see my mistakes. Once, in another class, I tried to answer a question. I said, he go to school every day. The teacher gently corrected me. He goes to school. Everyone laughed softly. My face turned red. That night, I didn't practice. I just lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling. A voice inside me said, see? You'll never be good enough. But another voice whispered, they laughed because they noticed. You spoke. That's what matters. And that small thought kept me going. One day, something changed. I was sitting alone in the school garden, listening to an English song. The singer's voice was full of emotion. I didn't understand every word, but I could feel it. The melody spoke to me in a language beyond grammar. It said, feel first. Understand later. That day, I realized something. I was always trying to speak English, but I never learned to listen to it. So I made a small promise to myself. I would listen every day. Not just with my ears, but with my heart. I started watching short videos, English stories, and simple YouTube talks. At first, I understood maybe 40%, then 50%, then 70%. But I didn't stop when I didn't understand. Instead, I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the story. I let the rhythm, the tone, and the feeling guide me. When I listened like that, English didn't feel like a subject anymore. It felt like a voice I wanted to understand, a voice that wanted to understand me too. Sometimes I repeated the words out loud. Not perfectly, not fast, just with feeling. Like this, I want to speak English. I will speak English. And later, I am speaking English now. Those small sentences were my seeds. And every time I spoke them, I felt them grow a little stronger inside me. Months passed. And one afternoon, my teacher said, "Next week, you all will give a short English speech." My hands started shaking again. A speech? In English? In front of everyone? The fear returned. The same fear from that first day, the silence, the pressure, the judgment. But this time, something was different. This time, I had a voice, a small one, but it was real. So I said yes. Every night, I practiced. I wrote my speech in simple words. My name is Jara. I come from a small town. I love learning English because it helps me dream bigger. I stood in front of the mirror again, just like the first time. I spoke slowly. I smiled. I pretended I was talking to a friend, not an audience. When the day came, my legs were shaking, but I walked up to the stage. I looked at my classmates, the same faces that once made me feel small. And I spoke. Not perfectly, not fluently, but honestly. My name is Jara. I come from a small town. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. I kept going. When I finished, the class clapped. That sound, that soft wave of applause, it wasn't just noise. It was freedom. Because at that moment, I realized fluency isn't about grammar. It's about courage. That speech changed everything. I started speaking more, small conversations, small mistakes, small victories. Every mistake became a teacher. Every attempt became a story. People started asking me, "How did you become so confident in English?" And I smiled, because they didn't see the nights I whispered to the mirror, or the mornings I listened to stories with my eyes closed, or the times I felt like giving up but didn't. Fluency isn't a gift. It's a collection of moments, moments when you choose to speak even when your voice shakes. Looking back now, I think that's what learning English is really about. Not learning every grammar rule, not memorizing 1,000 words, but finding your voice in another language. Sometimes that voice hides behind fear. Sometimes it hides behind silence. But it's there, waiting for you to speak, waiting for you to try again. So if you're listening to me right now and you feel afraid to speak, remember this. Every fluent speaker you admire was once silent too. Every confident voice you hear was once trembling. Fluency is not born, it's built, word by word, sentence by sentence, moment by moment. You don't need to speak perfectly. You just need to speak honestly. And when you do, you'll feel something beautiful, the sound of your own courage. That was the moment I found my voice. Not a loud one. Not a perfect one. Just mine. And that's where my journey truly began, a journey not just to speak English, but to live it, to feel it, to become it. Because English wasn't just a language anymore. It was a mirror showing me who I could be when I stopped being afraid. After that first speech, I thought I had finally found my voice. But the truth is, that was only the beginning. Because when you start speaking a new language, the world doesn't suddenly open up. You just start seeing how big it really is. And for me, that world was English. I grew up in a small town. The streets were quiet, the evenings smelled of tea and rain, and everyone spoke the same language. But every night, through my old phone, another world spoke to me in English. Sometimes it was a movie. Sometimes it was a song. Sometimes it was just a short video of someone traveling, smiling, living with a kind of freedom I could only imagine. And I remember thinking, their voices sound like dreams. When they spoke, their words didn't just carry meaning, they carried feeling, confidence, warmth, curiosity. I wanted to sound like that. I wanted to feel like that. I wanted to dream in that language. One night, I watched a movie that changed everything. It was about a man who started with nothing, but his words, his voice, changed his life. He spoke with honesty, with emotion, with hope. And I remember one line clearly. He said, "Your voice can open doors your hands can't." That line hit me hard, because I realized English wasn't just about passing exams or getting jobs. It was about freedom. Freedom to express who I was. Freedom to connect with people across oceans. Freedom to tell my story and to understand theirs. That night, I made a promise to myself. I will learn English, not just to speak it, but to live it. But making a promise is easy. Keeping it, that's where the real journey begins. At school, English was a subject, not a feeling. We memorized grammar rules, filled in blanks, and repeated textbook dialogues. "Hello, how are you?" "I am fine, thank you." It was mechanical, cold, empty. But when I listened to real people online, native speakers, vloggers, storytellers, their English was alive. They laughed, paused, changed tone, played with words. It was not just communication. It was art. So I started listening every day. Before sleeping, I'd plug in my earphones and let English fill my room. At first, it was noise. Then music. Then meaning. Sometimes I didn't understand. But I didn't stop. Because even when I didn't understand, I could feel something growing inside me, a new rhythm, a new way of thinking. But my family didn't understand at first. They would say, "Why are you wasting time listening to things you don't understand?" I smiled and said, "Because one day I will." I think every learner knows that stage, when people don't believe in your dream because they can't see it yet. But dreams don't need to be seen by others. They just need to be felt by you. So I kept going. There were times I felt lonely. My friends would hang out, chat, laugh in our native language, and I would be there with my earphones, lost in a different world. Sometimes I wondered if I was chasing something too far away. But then I would hear a beautiful English phrase in a movie and repeat it softly. "Someday, somehow, I'll make it." And it would remind me why I started. English became my secret companion, a quiet voice that told me not to give up. The more I listened, the more I noticed something strange. Native speakers didn't always speak correctly, but they always spoke naturally. They broke rules. They used contractions. They used emotion. And I thought, maybe I don't need to sound perfect. Maybe I just need to sound real. That's when I began practicing shadowing, repeating what I heard, at the same time as the speaker. At first, it was hard. Their voices were fast, their sounds were connected. But slowly, I began to catch the rhythm. I wasn't just learning words. I was learning music, the music of English. One afternoon, I was sitting by the window, watching the sky turn orange, when I caught myself thinking, in English. It was a small sentence, but it shocked me. I thought, what time is it now? It wasn't my native language. It was English. And it happened naturally, without effort. That moment felt magical. Because I realized that English wasn't something I was learning anymore. It was becoming a part of me. Still, not every day was easy. There were times when I felt like I wasn't improving at all. I would listen to long videos, and my mind would get tired. I'd try to speak, and my words would stumble like children learning to walk. Sometimes I even thought of quitting. But every time that thought came, I remembered the movie line, "Your voice can open doors your hands can't." And I whispered to myself, "Keep going. Your door is waiting." As months passed, I began to understand something deeper about learning English. It wasn't just about pronunciation or grammar or memorizing words. It was about mindset. It was about emotion. When I was relaxed, I could speak better. When I smiled, my words flowed naturally. When I spoke from my heart, not from my memory, people listened. English, I realized, was not just a language for the tongue. It was a language for the heart. One evening, I met a traveler in my town. He was lost and looking for directions. He spoke in English. And for the first time, I didn't freeze. I said slowly, "Yes, you go straight," and then left. He smiled and said, "Thank you so much." I smiled back, my heart pounding with joy. It was a short conversation, maybe 20 seconds. But those 20 seconds meant the world to me. Because that was the first time I used English in real life. Not in a classroom. Not in front of a mirror. But in the real world with a real person. It felt like touching a dream. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that small conversation. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that's when I understood what English really gave me. It wasn't just new words. It was new confidence. It made me curious, brave, open-minded. It made me feel connected to something bigger, a global story. I started noticing how people around the world used English in their own ways. Some spoke with strong accents, some mixed it with their native languages, some made mistakes, but all of them communicated. All of them connected. And I thought, maybe that's the secret. English is not about sounding like someone else. It's about sounding like yourself in another language. From that day, I stopped comparing myself to others. I stopped chasing perfect grammar. I started chasing clarity, connection, emotion. Because language, I realized, is not about showing intelligence. It's about showing yourself. One morning, my teacher asked me, "Why do you want to learn English so much?" And I said, without thinking, "Because my dreams speak this language." She smiled and said, "Then make sure you keep talking to your dreams." I never forgot that. Because she was right, dreams fade when you stop talking to them. And for me, English was how I talked to mine. So every day, I spoke to my dreams. Sometimes through words, sometimes through silence, sometimes through effort. Even when I felt tired, I whispered, "I'm still learning. I'm still growing." And slowly, that dream that once felt so far away began to feel closer. Not because I was perfect, but because I refused to stop. Looking back, I think that's how every dream works. At first, it speaks in a language you don't understand. It feels strange, difficult, confusing. But if you keep listening long enough, if you keep trying every day, one day, you begin to understand. That's what English did for me. It started as noise. Then it became melody. Then it became meaning. And finally, it became my voice. Now, when I look back at that shy boy in the classroom who couldn't say his name, I don't feel embarrassed anymore. I feel proud. Because that silence was where my journey began. And every learner starts there, at the edge of silence. But if you keep listening, keep dreaming, keep believing, you'll find your own words too. Because sometimes, the dream that seems farthest away is just waiting for you to learn its language. And when you finally do, it doesn't just change the way you speak, it changes the way you see yourself. There's a strange kind of pain that only language learners understand. It's the pain of knowing the words, but not being able to use them. It's like holding a handful of keys, but not knowing which one opens the door. That was me. I had learned so many English words. I had watched videos, listened to podcasts, read simple stories. I even wrote English sentences in my notebook every day. But when the time came to speak, the words got stuck, somewhere between my brain and my tongue. I remember one afternoon in class. The teacher asked a simple question. "What did you do yesterday?" I knew the answer in my head. I had practiced this question before. I wanted to say, yesterday, I went to the market with my friend. But when I opened my mouth, I said, yesterday. I go, market, friend. The teacher waited. The class was silent. And my confidence disappeared again, like smoke in the air. I sat down quietly, my heart sinking. My friends spoke so easily, so fast. Their words flowed like water. Mine felt like stones I had to push out, one by one. That day, I didn't talk to anyone during lunch. I went to the back of the school field, sat under a tree, and stared at my notebook. I whispered to myself, why can't I speak? I understand everything, but my mouth doesn't listen to me. It felt unfair. How could something that sounded so easy for others be so hard for me? That evening, I decided to record myself speaking. I opened the voice recorder on my phone and said, today, I went to school. When I listened back, I was shocked. I sounded nervous, broken, robotic. My pronunciation was weak, my pauses were long, my voice had no energy. I felt embarrassed, even though no one else was listening. But after that, something inside me whispered, keep going. Because sometimes, you need to hear your weakness to find your strength. So every night, I recorded myself. Sometimes for 1 minute, sometimes for 5. I talked about my day, my dreams, my feelings. At first, it was terrible. Then slowly, I started hearing progress. Small changes, small improvements. And every time I noticed even one better sound, one smoother sentence, it gave me hope. Still, speaking in public was a different story. One morning, our English teacher announced, we'll have a group discussion today. Everyone must speak. My heart started racing again. When my turn came, I tried to speak about technology and youth. I started with confidence. Technology is very important, but then my mind went blank. I forgot the next word. My voice faded. I looked down at my paper, but it didn't help. The teacher smiled kindly and said, it's okay. Take your time. But time didn't help either. My hands were shaking. My throat was dry. The words were hiding. I sat down quietly. And in that moment, I wanted to disappear. That night, I didn't record my voice. I didn't listen to English songs. I didn't watch videos. I just lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling. I thought, maybe I'm not made for this. Maybe English is for other people, smart people, confident people. My chest felt heavy. Because no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop failing when it mattered most. But life has a strange way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. A few days later, I met an old man in a bookstore. He was standing near the English section, reading a novel. I asked him politely, sir, do you speak English? He smiled and said, a little. We started talking. I told him about my struggle, how I could write but not speak. He listened quietly. Then he said something I'll never forget. He said, when a baby learns to speak, do you think it speaks perfectly? No. It listens, it tries, it fails, it tries again. Adults forget how to be babies. I didn't understand at first. But then I realized what he meant. As adults, we expect perfection. We want to sound fluent from day one. But babies don't. They play with sounds, they laugh at mistakes, they enjoy learning. And maybe that's why they learn so fast, because they aren't afraid. That evening, I walked home thinking deeply. Maybe my problem wasn't English. Maybe it was fear. So I made a decision. From that day, I would speak, no matter how broken, no matter how slow. I would speak to my friends, my teachers, even to myself. I would not wait for the perfect moment. Because if I waited for perfection, I would wait forever. The next day, I went to school early. I saw a few classmates talking near the gate. I took a deep breath and joined them. They were speaking in our local language, but I said in English, "Good morning. How are you?" They laughed softly. "Oh, English boy," one said. I laughed too and replied, "Yes, I try." That small exchange felt like victory, because I had spoken without fear. It wasn't about showing off. It was about breaking the silence that had kept me prisoner for so long. Every day after that, I tried to speak a little English. Sometimes I talked to my friends. Sometimes I talked to my mirror. Sometimes I talked to the sky. I am learning English. I am improving every day. I am not afraid. At first, these were just words. But slowly, they became beliefs. Of course, not every day was easy. Some people laughed. Some corrected me too harshly. Some ignored me. And every time that happened, I felt the same sting of failure. But this time, I didn't stop. Because I understood something important. You don't fail when you make mistakes. You fail when you stop trying. So I kept speaking. I started a small habit. Every night before sleeping, I recorded a 1-minute English diary. I would say things like, "Today I was happy because I learned a new word. Today I was tired, but I practiced anyway. Today I spoke to my teacher in English for 5 minutes." It became a small ritual, a conversation with myself. After 1 month, I listened to my first recording again. And I smiled. Because my voice had changed. It sounded stronger, more natural. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Still, there were moments when English made me cry. Like the time I was in an online meeting for a school project. Everyone spoke fast. I tried to follow, but I couldn't. When it was my turn, I froze again. My voice cracked. I said the wrong words. When the call ended, I felt embarrassed and defeated. I wanted to hide. But that night, I thought of what the old man said, adults forget how to be babies. So I told myself, it's okay to fall. Babies fall 1,000 times before they walk. I can fall a few more times before I speak freely. The next day, I joined the meeting again. I spoke slowly, clearly, simply. And something magical happened. People understood me. They smiled, nodded, listened. I realized that I didn't need to speak fast or fancy. I just needed to speak clearly and bravely. That was the first time I felt the real power of simple English. Weeks passed. And one evening, as I was walking home, I met a small boy trying to read a signboard in English. He looked confused, so I helped him read it. He smiled and said, "Wow, you speak English so well." I laughed, because I knew it wasn't so well. But his words warmed my heart. Because for the first time, someone saw me not as a learner, but as someone who could. That night, I realized something deeper. All those moments when words didn't come out, all those times I felt stupid or scared, they weren't failures. They were training. They were shaping my courage, my patience, my confidence. Sometimes, we only see progress when we look back. When we're in the middle of it, it just feels like pain. But later, we realize every struggle was teaching us something. Now, when I think about those silent moments, the times when English felt impossible, I don't feel shame anymore. Because that silence was necessary. It was like the soil where seeds grow quietly before they bloom. And when the first word finally blooms from your lips, it feels like spring inside your heart. So if you've ever felt the same, if your mind knows English, but your mouth refuses to cooperate, don't give up. It doesn't mean you're bad at languages. It just means you're human. Because speaking is not about knowledge. It's about comfort. And comfort comes slowly, through repetition, patience, and kindness to yourself. Keep speaking. Even when it's broken. Even when it's slow. Even when it hurts. Because one day, those broken sentences will turn into smooth stories. And those small words will carry your big dreams. And that's when you'll realize something powerful. English was never the enemy. Fear was. Once you let go of fear, your words will come out naturally, not as memorized lines, but as living parts of you. And that is the moment fluency begins. Have you ever noticed how babies learn their first language? They don't start by speaking. They start by listening. For months, they just listen to voices, to tone, to rhythm. They listen before they even understand the meaning. Slowly, without pressure, the sounds become familiar, and one day, the words simply flow. That was the lesson I learned late in my English journey, that fluency begins with silence, not speech. After those months of struggle, I decided to do something different. I stopped forcing myself to speak. I stopped judging myself for every mistake. I told myself, let me just listen. It sounded simple, but it was the turning point. Every morning I woke up, made my tea, and played an English video, not to study, not to take notes, but to listen like a friend. I didn't understand every word. Sometimes I understood just half. But I kept listening. I tried to hear how people connected words, how their voices rose and fell, how emotion danced in their speech. I realized that English wasn't just a language, it was a rhythm. One day, I was listening to a podcast where the speaker said something that stayed in my mind forever. He said, fluency is not about speed. It's about flow. And that was it. I understood why I felt stuck before. I had been trying to speak fast, but not naturally. I wanted to sound perfect, but not alive. So, I changed my goal. I didn't want to be a perfect speaker anymore. I wanted to be a natural one. Someone who could express feelings, tell stories, and make others feel something, even with simple words. I started walking every evening with my earphones on. As I walked through the narrow streets, I listened to conversations in English, podcasts, YouTube stories, small interviews. I repeated some lines softly under my breath. At first, I sounded strange. My mouth felt stiff. But after a few weeks, something changed. My tongue started to move more freely. My sentences started to connect. My brain began to think in short English thoughts. I still remember the day I first shadowed a story. It was a story about kindness, a woman helping a stranger on a rainy day. I listened once, twice, then a third time. On the fourth time, I tried to speak with the voice, repeating after her, copying her rhythm. It was hard, but it was fun. My tongue followed her sound. My heart followed her emotion. And that's when I felt it. The language was becoming part of me. At night, I would sit by my window, looking at the city lights, and just whisper English sentences to myself. Simple ones. Like, today was good. Or, I am learning slowly, but I am learning. And every time I said those small lines, I felt proud. Because they were mine. Then I realized something powerful. Listening isn't passive. It's active. When you truly listen, your brain is practicing even when your mouth is silent. Every sound, every pause, every emotional tone becomes a small seed inside you. And when the time is right, those seeds turn into speech. Sometimes I would close my eyes and imagine myself inside those stories I was hearing. If it was a conversation between friends in a cafe, I imagined sitting there, smiling, responding. If it was a motivational story, I imagined myself giving that speech. These mental pictures helped me feel more confident, more connected to English as a living thing, not as a subject in a textbook. A few weeks later, I noticed something new. When I listened, I could feel the meaning without translating. I didn't need to turn English into my native language first. My mind began to understand directly. It was a strange but beautiful experience, like my brain had opened a new door. And then, slowly, my confidence started to grow again. Because I was not just listening to words, I was listening to people. Real voices. Real emotions. And I could sense their meaning beyond grammar and vocabulary. I remember once, while listening to an English talk show, the speaker said, "You don't have to speak a lot to be understood. You just need to speak with feeling." That line hit me deep. It reminded me of why I started learning in the first place, not to impress anyone, but to connect. To share my thoughts, my dreams, my story. From that day, I practiced a new rule. Listen with your heart, not just your ears. When I listened, I imagined the speaker's feelings. When they laughed, I smiled. When they paused, I paused. When they spoke with sadness, I let myself feel it. And that emotional connection made my learning faster and deeper than ever before. Every evening, I wrote down one sentence that touched me that day. Sometimes it was a line from a movie, sometimes from a podcast, sometimes from a random YouTube video. Then I would repeat it 5 times slowly, clearly, feeling the rhythm. Those small sentences became like my treasures. Some of them were like this: don't rush, you are still growing. It's okay to make mistakes, that's how you move forward. You are not behind, you are becoming better. I didn't realize it then, but those lines were training not only my pronunciation, but my mindset too. One night, while shadowing a story about courage, I accidentally spoke without stopping. No hesitation, no fear. It was as if the words came from somewhere deep inside me. I wasn't thinking about grammar. I wasn't thinking about rules. I was just speaking. My heart was leading, and my mouth was following. That night I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I finally understood what fluency really means. It's not about how many words you know. It's about how freely you can share yourself. Listening had given me something that textbooks never did: the feeling of connection. The feeling that English was not foreign anymore. It was a part of my everyday sound, my thought, my identity. So I made listening my daily ritual. I didn't study for long hours anymore. I just made sure that English surrounded me through music, podcasts, and stories. And day by day, I noticed the small miracles. I could follow faster. I could speak smoother. And most importantly, I could enjoy the process. If you're listening to me now, maybe you're in the same place I once was, feeling like your words don't come out. Let me tell you this. It's okay. Don't force it. Just listen deeply every single day. Because one day, without even realizing it, your voice will join the sound. And when it does, it will feel like music, your own rhythm, your own story, finally alive in English. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, one of those quiet days that look simple on the outside, but change everything inside. I was sitting in a small cafe, the same one I visited almost every weekend. I had my earphones in, listening to an English podcast like always. It was about confidence, about how people often underestimate themselves because they focus on their mistakes more than their progress. The voice in my ear said something that made me pause my drink mid-sip. Confidence doesn't come before speaking. It comes while speaking. I smiled, thinking, that's true, and I whispered the sentence softly to myself. The man at the next table must have heard me because he turned and said, "Excuse me, are you learning English?" For a moment, my brain froze. My old fear came rushing back. My heart started beating fast, my throat felt dry, and my thoughts scrambled for words. A year ago, this would have been my nightmare. But something inside me felt different this time, calmer, warmer. I took a slow breath and said, "Yes, I am learning." And then, something magical happened. He smiled and said, "That's great. I'm actually an English teacher. I help students practice conversation sometimes. Would you like to try speaking a bit?" My mind screamed, "No, you're not ready." But another voice, the quiet one I had been training through all those listening hours, whispered, "Say yes. This is your moment." So I nodded. "Yes, I would like that." He smiled again, gently, not like a teacher judging a student, but like someone opening a door. "Okay, let's just talk," he said. "Nothing serious. Tell me, what do you like about learning English?" For a second, I panicked. My brain went blank. But then I remembered I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to be real. I took a sip of my tea, looked out the window, and said slowly, "I like how English can connect people. When I listen to stories or songs, I feel like I understand their feelings, even if they live far away." He nodded. "That's a beautiful answer." And then we talked. At first, my words were slow, uncertain. But after a few sentences, something changed. The fear began to fade. My sentences started to flow without effort. I wasn't translating. I wasn't thinking about grammar. The words just came out, naturally, smoothly, almost like music. We talked about movies, travel, dreams. I laughed when I made mistakes, and so did he. It felt so easy, so human. I remember telling him a story about how I once ordered the wrong meal because I misunderstood a waiter in English. He laughed and said, "That's part of the journey. The more mistakes you make, the better you get." And I realized something for the first time. I wasn't afraid of sounding wrong. Because I was speaking. I was connecting. The wall between me and English had fallen. That short conversation lasted maybe 15 minutes. But it felt like a small lifetime. When it ended, he said, "You speak very clearly. You just needed a little push." Those words stayed with me all day. I kept repeating them in my mind. You just needed a little push. When I walked home, I replayed the conversation in my head. It was the first time I had spoken English freely, without pressure, without fear. I didn't even notice how naturally the words had come out until later. It was like something inside me had unlocked. That night, I sat by my window again, like I often did. But this time, I wasn't whispering practice sentences. I was smiling, remembering every line of that conversation, the way my voice had sounded, not perfect, but alive. I realized that fluency doesn't arrive one morning like a gift. It grows quietly, one small act of courage at a time. It doesn't come when you know everything. It comes when you stop waiting to be ready. After that day, my relationship with English changed completely. I stopped calling myself a learner. I started calling myself a speaker. Because that's what I was now, someone who speaks. Maybe slowly, maybe with mistakes, but with confidence. The next week, I joined an online English group. It was full of learners from different countries: Brazil, Japan, Turkey, Egypt. At first, I was nervous again. But when it was my turn to speak, I remembered that cafe moment. I took a breath and began, "Hi everyone, my name is Jara," and once again, the words came out naturally. Something deep inside me had shifted. Speaking English was no longer about fear or grammar, it was about sharing myself. Every time I spoke, I learned something new, not about the language, but about me. I started noticing things I had never noticed before. The sound of my own voice became familiar. The way I used pauses and intonation started to change. My sentences carried more feeling. I wasn't just speaking words anymore, I was telling stories. Sometimes, late at night, I replayed my own voice recordings and smiled. Not because they were perfect, but because they were mine. Every word, every little mistake, was a memory of growth. One day, I looked back at my old notes from a year before. I had written in big letters, "I can't speak." I crossed that line out and wrote, "I can speak, and I'm still growing." That single moment, that cafe conversation, became a symbol for me. It reminded me that fluency doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with a heartbeat, a breath, a moment of courage. When I told my friend about what happened, she asked, "How did you speak so easily?" And I said, "I didn't speak easily. I spoke naturally." There's a difference. Speaking easily means you know every word. Speaking naturally means you know yourself. You're not fighting with fear or perfection. You're simply flowing with what you have. From that day forward, every time I met someone new, I made a promise to speak English at least once, even if just a few sentences. Sometimes it was messy, sometimes funny, sometimes beautiful. But each time, I felt my confidence grow stronger. And slowly, English stopped being something outside me. It became a part of my identity, the way I saw the world, the way I expressed emotions. That's the magic moment I want you to imagine, too. The day you will speak without thinking. The day your fear will quietly disappear. The day your words will rise naturally, like water flowing down a river. You won't even notice it when it happens. You'll only realize it later, when you're walking home, smiling to yourself, whispering, "I did it." Because that's what fluency truly is, not a destination, but a quiet realization. It's the day you finally trust yourself. After that cafe conversation, something inside me changed. It wasn't just my English, it was the way I saw myself. For years, I had looked at English as a mountain I had to climb. Every new word, every grammar rule felt like another heavy step upward. But now, it didn't feel like that anymore. English had become something softer, something closer. It wasn't a wall. It was a mirror. When I spoke, I didn't just hear English, I heard me. My thoughts, my hopes, my fears, all reflected back in another language. And in that reflection, I started to understand myself in new ways. You see, English didn't just teach me how to communicate. It taught me how to listen to my own voice, how to be patient with myself, how to express feelings that I couldn't even describe before. Some mornings, I would wake up, look into the mirror, and speak softly to myself in English. "Good morning," I'd say. "Today, I'm going to do my best." It sounds small, I know, but those moments became my daily ritual, my way of beginning each day with courage. At first, it was just a few lines, greetings, affirmations, simple sentences. But soon, it grew. I started telling myself short stories. Like, "Yesterday was a tough day, but I learned something." Or, "I felt shy in class, but I tried, and that matters." It was strange at first, talking to my reflection. But slowly, I realized something profound. I wasn't just practicing English, I was practicing self-kindness. Through English, I was learning how to speak to myself gently, to forgive mistakes, to celebrate small wins. And every time I did, I could see how my confidence grew from the inside out. Then came another important discovery, the habit of thinking in English. It didn't happen overnight. But one evening, while cooking dinner, I caught myself thinking, I need more salt. And I realized I had said it in English, not my native language. I smiled so wide. It was such a small sentence, but it meant something huge. It meant that English had moved from my mind into my daily life. From that moment, I started making small, simple changes. When I walked to work, I described what I saw in English. "The sky is so clear today. That shop looks new. That man is talking loudly on the phone." When I watched people on the street, I tried to imagine their stories in English sentences. When I was alone, I would think out loud. Not like reading a textbook, but like talking to a friend. "I'm tired, but it's okay. Let's keep going. This tea is really good." Those small sentences became my bridge, the bridge between silence and fluency. Another habit that changed me was shadowing. Every night, I listened to short English videos and repeated after them slowly, with feeling. Not to sound exactly the same, but to feel the emotion behind the words. Sometimes it was a motivational speech. Sometimes it was a movie scene. Sometimes just a YouTube story like this one. I would listen, repeat, pause, and repeat again. It wasn't easy. My tongue twisted. My breath ran out. But I kept going. Because every time I shadowed a voice, I felt like I was borrowing a little bit of its strength. Over time, I started to notice how my tone changed. My voice became clearer, warmer. My sentences flowed with more life. It was as if I was slowly building a new version of myself, one that was confident, expressive, and free. And the more I practiced, the more I realized that English wasn't just a language to me anymore. It was a mirror reflecting my inner growth. When I felt shy, my English sounded small. When I felt confident, it sounded strong. When I was tired or sad, my rhythm slowed down. When I was happy, my voice was full of light. English showed me my emotions in sound form. It became a way to understand what was happening inside me. One night, I recorded a voice journal, just me, talking about my day in English. At first, I planned to do it for 5 minutes, but I ended up speaking for 30. When I played it back later, I almost didn't recognize my voice. It sounded calm, mature, alive. That night, I cried again, but this time, not from frustration, from pride. Because I had built that voice with my own patience, my own time, my own heart. The next day, I started helping a few of my classmates who were still afraid to speak. I told them, you don't need perfect English to express your story. You just need to believe that your story deserves to be told. When I spoke those words, I realized I was talking to my old self, the version of me who used to stay silent, afraid of mistakes. From that moment on, I started helping others practice English in small groups. Not as a teacher, but as a friend. We shared our fears, our funny mistakes, our dreams. And every time someone spoke, no matter how broken their English was, we clapped and cheered. That was when I saw the real power of language connection. The way one small word can bring two strangers closer. The way one sentence can make someone smile. And I thought to myself, if language can do this, if it can heal fear, create friendship, and build confidence, then it's not just about speaking. It's about becoming. Through English, I had become more open, more patient, more human. I no longer hid behind silence. I no longer feared judgment. I learned to express, to feel, to understand. One day, during a quiet walk by the river, I realized something simple but true. Fluency wasn't the end of my journey. It was just the beginning. Because now, I wasn't learning English for tests or interviews anymore. I was learning it to live, to think, to connect, to dream bigger. When I looked at my reflection in the water, I smiled and whispered. English became my mirror. Because every word I spoke reflected who I was becoming. Not perfect, not native, but real. That's what fluency really means. It's not about sounding like someone else. It's about sounding like yourself, clearly, confidently, and with heart. There comes a moment in every learner's journey when you stop counting how many words you know, how many grammar rules you've learned, or how many times you've practiced. Because one day, you simply feel the language inside you. It's not a subject anymore. It's not a task on your to-do list. It becomes something living, a part of who you are. That's what happened to me. One quiet morning, while walking to work, I realized that I was no longer learning English, I was living it. It started in small, invisible ways. The way my thoughts formed in English without effort. The way I noticed myself smiling at English jokes online. The way I dreamed in English sometimes, not perfectly, but naturally. I remember one dream clearly. I was sitting in a park, talking to someone I didn't know, completely in English. There was no fear, no translation, no thinking. Just flow. When I woke up, I laughed softly and said to myself, I didn't just learn English. I became English for a while. And that's when I understood something deep. You don't learn English like a skill. You become it through feeling, through time, through presence. You become English when you stop studying words and start living with them. When you listen to a song and feel its emotion instead of translating the lyrics. When you watch a movie and forget you're watching it in another language. When you talk to someone and stop worrying about mistakes because connection feels more important. That's the real secret of fluency, when the language stops being foreign. It doesn't mean you forget your native tongue or who you are. It means you expand your world. You make space for another rhythm, another way of thinking, another way of feeling. For me, English became a way to see myself differently. In my native language, I often felt shy, serious, quiet. But in English, I discovered another version of me, someone more open, expressive, and curious. Sometimes I wondered, why do I feel braver in English than in my own language? And then I realized, because English had no memories of my past fears. It didn't carry my old stories of failure. It was a blank page where I could write a new one. That's why so many people feel more confident when they speak a second language. It gives you a chance to start fresh, to redefine yourself. And in that sense, English became my mirror and my rebirth. It wasn't about grammar anymore. It was about emotion. It wasn't about vocabulary lists. It was about connection. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. I started noticing beauty in small English moments, the softness of thank you, the power of I believe, the comfort in it's okay. These words, so simple, carried worlds inside them. Every morning when I walked through the city, I tried to describe the world in English, not as practice, but as meditation. The air is cold, but the sun is warm. People are rushing, but I feel calm. Today feels like a new beginning. Those small sentences turned my daily life into a living classroom, one without pressure, without fear, without rules. Sometimes I'd sit in silence and just listen to the world, the sound of the rain, footsteps on the street, the hum of traffic, and I'd imagine those sounds in English words. I'd think, the rain is whispering, or the night feels alive. And in those moments, English became poetry. That's when I knew I wasn't just learning it. I was becoming it. One evening, I met that same teacher from the cafe again. We talked for a long time about life, language, and dreams. I told him how much my English had changed, how I'd started helping others, how I now loved speaking. He smiled and said, "You've found your rhythm. English is not something you carry anymore. It carries you." His words made me pause. Because that was exactly how it felt. Like English was holding me up, gently, like an invisible friend who had walked with me all this time. And maybe that's what language really is, a companion. Something that stays with you, shapes you, helps you grow. Later that night, while journaling, I wrote, I used to chase English like it was running away from me. But all along it was waiting for me to slow down, to listen, to open my heart. And I realized fluency is not something you reach. It's something you feel. When you start to see, think, and love through another language, that's when you've become it. And that's what I want you to feel too. Because no matter where you are in your English journey, beginner, intermediate, or advanced, you already have everything inside you to become fluent. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know every word. You just have to show up, to listen, to speak, to keep going even when it feels slow. English is not a mountain you climb. It's a river. And when you stop fighting against it, you learn to flow. Flowing doesn't mean never making mistakes. It means moving forward gently with trust. That's how you become fluent. That's how you become English. You'll know it has happened when one day you speak and the words don't sound like someone else's anymore. They sound like you. And that's when you'll smile quietly and think, I didn't just learn English. I became it. When people ask me now, how did you learn English so well? I don't say I studied for hours or memorized 1,000 words. I tell them I learned to feel English before I tried to master it. Because fluency is not about speed, it's about connection. It's not about how fast you speak. It's about how deeply you understand yourself through the language. Let me tell you a truth most learners miss. You don't need to speak fast to sound fluent. You need to speak smart. To speak smart means you think clearly. You use words that fit your heart, not just your head. You pause when you need time. You listen before you reply. That's real fluency, the ability to stay calm, confident, and connected even when your vocabulary isn't perfect. I used to think fluent speakers never made mistakes. But when I listened closely, I noticed even native speakers pause, restart, or say, and you know. So I stopped trying to sound perfect. And suddenly, I started to sound real. Here's what I learned. Smart speakers don't rush. They use silence as power. Smart learners don't memorize everything. They choose words they love and use them daily. Smart thinkers don't compare themselves. They focus on progress, not perfection. Smart communicators don't try to impress. They try to express. The moment you stop trying to sound smart and start trying to connect, that's the moment your English transforms. Because learning a language is not about building walls of words, it's about opening doors of understanding. Every time you talk, every time you listen, every time you make a mistake, you are building that door. And one day, you'll walk through it effortlessly. I want you to imagine something right now. A future version of you, standing confidently, speaking English naturally. Your eyes are calm. Your words flow like music. You're not thinking, am I right? You're thinking, am I real? And in that moment, you realize you made it. Not because you spoke like a native, but because you spoke like yourself. That's the real success. So as we close this story, I'll leave you with 5 truths I wish someone told me earlier. 1. You don't need more words, you need more use. Point 2. You don't need more rules, you need more rhythm. Point 3. You don't need to sound native, you need to sound authentic. Point 4. You don't need to be confident before speaking, you gain confidence by speaking. Point 5. You don't need to learn English fast, you need to learn it forever. Because English, like life, isn't a finish line. It's a journey. And the smarter you walk it, with awareness, curiosity, and courage, the faster you'll grow. So, to every learner listening, don't give up. Don't wait for the perfect time. And don't hide behind fear. Speak, even if your voice shakes. Learn, even if you forget. Try, even if you fail. Because every small sentence you speak in English is a victory, a moment of bravery, a step toward your bigger self. And one day, you'll look back and realize you didn't just learn English. You built a bridge from who you were to who you were meant to be. That's the power of language. That's the beauty of becoming fluent, not just in English, but in life itself. This is Super English Talks, and if you're still here, still listening, still learning, then you, my friend, are already on your way. Because learning English isn't about being perfect, it's about being brave. Every time you open your mouth to speak, every time you listen with your heart, you grow a little more. So don't chase speed. Chase clarity. Don't chase perfection. Chase connection. And remember, you don't have to sound like anyone else. You just have to sound like you. So take this story with you. Repeat it. Feel it. Speak it again and again until your voice feels free. Because the smartest way to learn English is to live it. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. Keep speaking. Keep believing. And as always, speak smart. Learn fast. Stay brave.